Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to my home.
So, could you tell us a bit more about your upbringing and the type of environment that you were in as a child?
Yeah, sure. So, for some of you guys who are already familiar with the history of the Sudan, Sudan has gone through several decades of civil war, and myself and many others who were lucky or unlucky to be born in Sudan. We experienced that sort of war that was happening way back in the early 80s to like 90s. So that's kind of like where, and let's say about 1990, really that's when the real peak of that war happened in my area, which is South Kordofan, specifically in an area called the Nuba Mountains. And by the early 90s, the Sudan government, or the government of Sudan, as they're called, they moved into the Nuba Mountains with, I guess they really wanted to get rid of the Sudan of the Black Africans, because the government in Sudan mostly comprised of Arabs. So they moved from different part of the Middle East and into Sudan. So they kind of like wanted to cleanse Sudan of all of the black inhabitants, which I guess the Nuba people are indigenous to the area. And also, it has a rich tapestry of not only just the cultures, but the place itself is very rich in mineral deposits. So oil, gold. It's just in abundance. So I guess wanted to keep that for themselves. And then I guess so they come in with gunships, jets, and basically moved in and wiping down the villages and a few other places. So it's then it moved to Kenya. So that's yeah.
So, from this move from Sudan to Kenya and then eventually to Uganda, how is your family coping through this?
Well, the initial phases, I must be honest, it was very difficult because I left Sudan when I was about 6, so it's fairly young. But you must understand the context of that first of all. During '94, there was a huge drought that was basically sweeping the Nuba Mountains. But then part of that, we had the government of Sudan actually engineering a famine. Okay, and so what they did was poison all of the water sources. Number one, and then with obviously their jets, so they destroyed all of the crops, all the farmlands. Um, they basically call it a war of attrition, basically trying to drive the population out of their neighborhood by creating conditions which are completely unbearable for survival. So then people basically have nowhere. You can't eat, can't drink clean water. So lots of people had to flee, and obviously not to mention the destruction of lives. And on top of that, they actually had a no-fly zone over the entire Nuba Mountains, so you couldn't actually get aid. So, we obviously had all of the aid organizations on standby, but they could not fly, to get aid to the people. So, and if you've got, the soldiers who were going to the front lines, if they were not dying because of the war, or they were dying because of starvation. And then in '96, there was a ceasefire. So we had aid now was coming into the Nuba Mountains. And my auntie at the time was in Uganda. So when that first plane arrived, I just remember, I think it would have been like very, very early in the morning. I wasn't aware that I would be leaving my parents. And so we trekked down to the local airstrip. And then, little boy, I know it, they said, oh, you have to jump on the plane. And I'm looking at my mom. It was a very difficult time, obviously, because we have in this life-changing decision, or point in time which was really life-changing for myself and my entire family. And so my dad said he put me in the guardianship of the local pastor, who also knew my auntie. and he said, "Look, I'm sending my son because obviously things are very dire. We don't know if we're gonna be here tomorrow, but at least if if it's so be it that the whole place is taken over, we will have our son removed from the conflict and he'll be somewhere safe." So that was in '96. Then we moved to Kakuma refugee camp, and during that time it was just a barren land. There was few pockets of refugees that moved from other parts of Sudan, and so we had a settlement camp there. I started my early childhood education there. It was something like 6, 7 months, maybe at most about a year. And then the opportunity came for me then to move into Uganda to go and stay with with my auntie. So that would have been now 97. So yeah, that's kind of like where I spent about 10 years. And my cousins, which is my auntie's kids, they're also there. When I was in grade 6, my auntie found out that we had a connection. One of the gentlemen who was in the army with my late uncle. He was actually living in Australia, and I think he was one of the first migrants or refugee migrants to move to Australia. And so he went about sponsoring us to come to Australia. So from grade 6, the process took up until I was in secondary 3, which is like in Australia would be equivalent of grade 11, give or take. And that was in 2006. So that's when we successfully migrated to Australia.
So, transitioning from Uganda to Australia, what were some of the big cultural differences that you noticed when moving over here?
So there's quite a few. So again, there is that physical, physical difference. In that I'm coming from Africa, everybody's black, well, mostly, and then in Australia you've got like mix of indigenous and also white people. So that's the obvious one, obvious difference. But then also just the way, for example, infrastructure is huge difference. It's like super advanced. That's one thing. But probably like just taking it down to like culturally, like there's just Europeans just have different way of doing things. Like, and then most of Africa is really conservative. For example, the great thing about that, because we were young, it's easy for us to adapt. I mean, to the new system, new way of life. But our parents, not so much. So when you're at home, you expect it. There's just a certain expectation, and from a majority of African families, they have a set way of doing things. But then also Australian ones, they have different ways. For example, you go to a party when you're in high school. First, African parents like, man, you need to be studying or you need to do something else. But you're like, hey, but all my friends are going to party, so I need to be there as well. So you get in trouble. You get in trouble for that. So what you have to do now is, in the presence of your parents, you have to do these things which are going to please them. Then you also what you tend to discover is when you're out in the Australian community, they have different ways of doing things as well. So you can't do exactly the same thing. That you have to do. You have to like try to conform. So now there's a conflict. So who are you gonna please? And so now you start to have internal conflict. Unfortunately, for some people, that means they have to act up because now they're lost in who they are. Also, I think a lot of the Australians don't have that understanding of having not understanding, but they haven't been through a war, so they don't really understand that sometimes when you're acting up, it could be because you're traumatized. You have PTSD. It's just you don't just wake up one day and it's all rosy. So there will still be elements. So because of not having to go through that war, so there's no shared experience. So that's kind of like where majority of that differences and the cultural difference I think would really come in. But I mean, we sort of like just took it for what it is. Take the good with the bad. So yeah.
So take us through the first couple steps to starting your charity in 2019.
Hey, great. So in 2019, I had a great opportunity to do a TEDx at QUT. And that was probably, yeah, towards the end of my degree. Obviously, I've been a refugee for most of my life. You know, you escape that conflict in Sudan because somebody thought you didn't belong there, and then you've got the local people saying, "Well, you're not welcome here." So, which means automatically you lose that sense of belonging. Doesn't matter how long you stayed, you've been there. If somebody say you don't belong here, it kind of like cuts you a couple of times. Then you move to Australia. Again, it's very similar thing. But that's okay. So why don't I talk about, okay, what is a refugee and who am I? Where have I been actually? Where am I and where am I going? And then I also looked at my story about how I was just going through that war, and then I come, Australia, and I'd gone to uni, I graduated, gainfully employed, I was in a job I liked, and then through that process, obviously I was able to discover myself. So I thought education actually changed my life. So, and then to read from the teacher's perspective in Sudan, in the Nuba Mountains, saying, I am a headmaster. I have got 1,700 students, but we don't have any books. And I guess that means automatically all of the students are not going to have any books. Bringing that into Australian context, a lot of houses or a lot of households have books, shelves of books, probably garages full of books. And obviously we know that books collecting dust is really not great. So they need to be read. So from that, I decided that after this, because education has actually changed my life, if I need to do something about that. So I decided, okay, why don't I do some more research into this? And then discovering that over 800 million people around the world, they face illiteracy, and 200 or 240, 60 million of these young people are in sub-Saharan Africa. So, the statistic for 1 in 4 is actually the name that of 1 in 4 comes from the fact that 1 in 4 children can't read and write. I guess that sort of like set the ball rolling. I went on to Gumtree, then on Facebook, I reached out to people who were selling books on Marketplace. Though most of them were just happy to donate those books. I remember my first one was a suitcase. Hopped on the train, on the bus, and then walked a few miles, whatever, to go and collect the books. I come back, and I was wheeling the suitcase on the road. This isn't Australia, but it's pretty bad. But anyway, rolling that suitcase, and all of the wheels just broke, and like just muscled that into the train, into the bus, and then into the train back, and then coming down here, took over my son's bedroom. From then we just started collecting the books, and then we're just piling and piling. I reached out to one of my former teachers from St. James. His name is Andrew Everington. Said, hey Andrew, are you still at Jimmy's? Because I'm trying to get 1,000,000 books. I reckon if St. James can help us out, that would be great. Then he went and spoke to the librarian, and they sent messages to all of like the Edmund Rice schools. But one interesting thing though, with the charity started, I guess, through the power of connection. Wouldn't you believe it? Andrew was at a cafe, having a chat to some guy. He goes, I've got this Sudanese guy. He's been like trying to collect books. We've got books now, but I'm having some issues to do with like logistics. I don't know. Do you know any, or something along those lines? The guy goes, oh, guess what? I got a guy called, his name is Todd Crowley, and he's a logistics expert. I reckon you guys should have a conversation. So he goes, I've got his number. So the guy gives Andrew his number, Todd's number, and Andrew goes up, hey, Todd, you don't know me, but my name is Andrew. I'm a teacher at St. James. I've got a guy, his name is Steven. He's got an amazing story. And recently he started a charity called 1 in 4 Children. This is what the charity stands for. And he said like he's trying to get 1,000,000 books over to Africa and stuff. But he's kind of like a bit hamstrung because it's expensive and he doesn't have the money for it. And Todd goes, yep, no worries, my company will look after it. So then, we have this meeting with Todd. And Todd goes, yeah, well, what do you need? He goes, so I need a container, and obviously need somehow to pay for it. And he goes, okay, no worries. So he makes a phone call, and then that project, we ended up doing a 40-foot container to Sudan. It was like 30 grand. And he basically just foot the bill through his company, Proudly Corp, and his, you know, like his family. That's his family business. So they helped us to get those books. There was a young man called Dixon Ken. He's actually from Papua New Guinea. He's also an alumni, a QT alumni, and he was also trying to do something, you know, similar. I said, hey mate, I think it'd be great if we can collaborate, and we'll just run 1 in 4, and whatever we get, we'll send stuff to PNG, and wherever we get the chance, we'll send stuff to Africa. So, and then he and I just, you know, started working together, and he had some existing connections to, you know, the Rotary Club, and also his local church. So they got, a lot. They just put the word out there. We're gonna try the next shipment. We're trying to send some stuff to PNG. So if you've got any clothes, toys, solar panels, etc., just donate them. And then I think he also had a conversation with the good folks at QUT. Then the university very kindly donated about 28, you know, computers or laptops, and then with all of the solar panels and another 20,000 books, we filled up the container and shipped it off. Well, one of the villages didn't have a high school at all, so all of the kids were completely cut off. So if you finish primary school, nowhere else for you to go. And so, as a direct impact of the donation of those books, they ended up having the Minister for Education and said, "Hey, well, you guys didn't have any resources before, but now you've got the books, so we can give you guys a license to operate as a high school." So it's really amazing. And then, so just recently we did another 20,000. So that's all 70,000 books all up.
So yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Is there any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave with us?
Yeah, sure. So you know the mission of 1 in 4 is to eradicate poverty by creating a future where all children can read and write. And hand on heart, through my own personal experience, I can say that there is truly no greater way to achieve liberation than through education. And when we think about the issue about illiteracy, it's so big because estimate 800 million people. Of course, we can't solve that all at once. You have to start. You have to start from somewhere. And for us, it was more like just doing what we can that was within our means and within our power to be able to do that. And for anyone who has a dream that you'd like to fulfill, you have to know that you have to have courage to start. You have to be determined because it's your dream. You have to be persistent because the road is not always smooth, and you have to be committed and consistent because otherwise you will never start and you'll never finish. And I guess for us, it's been a pathway, you know, for to be able to create a change, not only in the community, but also for me personally, because I still have my personal goals, and I have to be committed, and I have to be consistent so that I can actually achieve that what I want for my family. The challenges with being a refugee, you know, we are real people, you know, with stories, and sometimes just having that conversation with you will actually allow you to come into my world and therefore allow me to come into your world. And I think through this conversation, through this dialogue, we are able to create a more successful, you know, integrated community, if you like. And I think that the happiness from sharing the stories, you know, between us and amongst us, it just uplifts us and uplifts our soul. So you know, you don't have to go and do like any groundbreaking things. It's just the little things that make the biggest impact. So for some of you guys who go out there in the community and engage people from different cultures, I think that's really the best way to be. And yeah, thank you guys for coming in and, you know, doing this sit down to know about my story, and just know my story is not exceptional by any means. There are a lot of young people from my community that have a lot more inspiring and incredible stories, and I think, you know, you should just go out there and explore.
Well, thank you so much. It has been an incredible experience learning about your journey and the journey of others in Sudan and Kenya and Uganda, and also about the incredible work you've been able to do in the short span of time that you've had the charity up and running for. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.